The Bronze Age lasted for over 2,000 years, bringing the rise of powerful civilizations in the Near East. Small settlements grew into bustling cities, home to grand palaces and towering monuments. Writing and art flourished, and trade routes stretched from India to Britain, creating one of the earliest examples of globalization. A Babylonian king might drink fine Hittite wine, spiced with flavors from India, from a bronze cup cast with Cypriot copper and Afghan tin. His queen could wear jewelry crafted in Crete from Baltic amber and dress in silk brought from China. Letters between Egyptian pharaohs and Hittite rulers reveal a fascinating world of ancient diplomacy, where kings sent envoys and exchanged lavish gifts, arranged marriages to secure alliances, offered advice, issued threats, and, when words failed, went to war. Then, almost without warning, everything fell apart. Hundreds of cities were burned to the ground, torn apart by fire and war. Some powerful kingdoms disappeared entirely, while others managed to survive but were set back by centuries. In many regions, writing vanished, and culture withered. People living among the ruins could hardly believe that the towering structures around them had once been built by human hands. The series of events that brought the Bronze Age world to its knees is known as the Late Bronze Age Collapse. When disasters happen, there's always a tendency to look for a single, simple explanation: an erupting volcano, a devastating war, a long drought or flood, an invasion of barbarians. But history is rarely that straightforward. No one cause alone could have led to such widespread destruction. So, let's take a deeper look at how it all unraveled. Before the Bronze Age collapse, the Near East was dominated by several powerful states, with Egypt at the forefront. In the 16th century BC, the Egyptians expelled the Hyksos, foreign invaders who had ruled for nearly a century. This victory marked the rise of the new kingdom, with Thebes as its capital. Years of resistance against the Hyksos had toughened the Egyptians, giving birth to a powerful and skilled military class. After gaining independence, the Egyptians set their sights on Canaan and Syria. Their armies pushed as far as the Euphrates, where Pharaoh Thutmose erected a stele to mark his rule. But instead of simply demanding tribute from the conquered cities, he left behind military garrisons and officials to govern in his name, ensuring Egypt's control for generations. The wealth pouring in from these new territories ushered in a golden age. Art, sculpture, and architecture flourished, while Egypt's trade and military dominance grew stronger than ever. The pharaohs who followed, especially the grandson of Thutmose I, fought relentlessly to expand and secure their influence in the Near East. Their biggest rivals were the Kingdom of Mitanni and the Syro-Hittite city-states of Syria and the Levant. During this period, Egypt became the first true superpower of the Bronze Age. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, Assyria was on the rise. The weakening of Mitanni, caught between Egyptian and Hittite expansion, along with internal struggles in Kassite Babylonia, created the perfect opening. Under King Adad-nirari I, the Assyrians launched successful campaigns against their neighbors and won recognition from both Egypt and Babylon. Situated at the crossroads of key trade routes, Assyria quickly grew into a wealthy and formidable power. From the 17th to the 13th century BC, the Hittites ruled over Anatolia. However, their kingdom wasn't a unified empire. At the top was the Hassu, the supreme king, who was regarded as the first among equals, ruling alongside other kings and princes who held significant power. Each of these rulers commanded their own battle-hardened forces. During successful military campaigns, the aristocracy would rally around the Hassu and join in his conquests. In return, they received spoils, land, and slaves. The territories the Hittites conquered saw the rise of small, quasi-independent states, with cities forced to pay tribute. But when military success turned against the Hassu, internal struggles and power grabs quickly erupted within the kingdom. More than half of the Hassus met untimely deaths, many of them through assassination. The Hittite kingdom was surrounded by a number of vassal states with mixed populations of Hittites, Luwians, and Greeks. The largest of these states were Arzawa, Kidzuwatna, Lukka, Isua, and Wilusa, which is known to us through Homeric tales as Troy. These states were Hittite allies in war, and in return, they received military support when needed. The Hittites' main geopolitical goal was to control the trade crossroads in Syria, near the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates. This would give them direct access to the riches of the Levant and Mesopotamia. But standing in the way of their expansion was the kingdom of Mitanni, which was already under pressure from the Assyrians and Egyptians. By the early 13th century BC, Mitanni could no longer withstand the might of its neighbors and collapsed. This led to a direct clash between the Hittites and Egyptians. The interests of these two superpowers came into conflict. The Hittites wanted to expand south, while the Egyptians were determined to push north. Both empires also had their eyes on the east, but there they encountered the rising power of Assyria. Border skirmishes were a constant between the three powers, and eventually, a decisive battle took place. The armies of Hittite king Muwatalli II and Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II met near the city of Kadesh. The battle was fierce, but neither side emerged with a clear victory. Both the Egyptians and the Hittites suffered heavy losses, but no one came out on top. The Egyptians held the battlefield, but due to their significant casualties and exhaustion, they were unable to continue the war or capture Kadesh, which had been the primary goal. Shortly after the battle, the first peace treaty in history was signed between the Hittites and Egyptians, effectively stopping Egypt's push northward. After the Battle of Kadesh, a fragile balance of power was established between Egypt, the Hittite Empire, and Assyria, but peace remained elusive. Skirmishes between the three states continued. Kadesh itself changed hands several times, but none of the powers were able to make significant territorial gains. Turning to Greece, the Minoan civilization thrived for many centuries on Crete and the Aegean Islands. The Minoans built large, unfortified cities, worshipped bulls and the mother goddess, and their women often went about with bare breasts. Their ships sailed across the entire Mediterranean, from Spain to Egypt. The Minoans were the first to embrace thalassocracy, rule over the seas. Their control of the Mediterranean was driven by a network of strategic outposts that allowed them to dominate key trade routes. This not only brought them wealth, but also political influence, making them a powerful force. The Minoans' dominance was made possible by their prime location and their advanced shipbuilding technology. In the 16th century BC, a catastrophic volcanic eruption hit the island of Thera in the Aegean Sea. The explosion was so powerful that it was equivalent to the force of 200,000 atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima. Millions of tons of volcanic ash were blasted into the air, and massive tsunamis, with waves as high as 100 meters, spread from the eruption's epicenter. This eruption caused widespread devastation across the eastern Mediterranean. But for the Minoans, it nearly spelled their end. In just one day, their entire naval power was wiped out, and their coastal cities were left in ruins. The Minoans never fully recovered from the disaster and were eventually conquered by a new civilization that had emerged from mainland Greece, the Mycenaeans. While we still don't know the exact ethnicity of the Minoans, as their language remains undeciphered, we do know that their successors, the Mycenaeans, were the ancestors of the ancient Greeks and spoke an early form of the Greek language. The Mycenaeans inherited much of the Minoans' culture and achievements. In a short time, the Mycenaean civilization spread across the Aegean Islands and into Ionia, establishing cities like Athens, Tiryns, Mycenae, Pylos, Miletus, and Iolcus. The Mycenaeans, or Achaeans as they called themselves, never formed a single unified state, which set them apart from the centralized kingdoms of the Near East. Instead, their civilization was made up of small, independent states, each separated by natural barriers like mountains, rivers, and seas. Unlike the Minoans, who were relatively peaceful, the Achaeans were fierce warriors, constantly battling each other. Because of this, their cities were surrounded by massive defensive walls. At sea, they failed to recreate the powerful Minoan naval empire. The sea simply didn't bend to their will. Instead, the Phoenicians took over as the dominant maritime power, while the Achaeans turned to what they did best, piracy and raiding, which proved both familiar and highly profitable. Let's now turn back to Asia Minor. The Hittite Empire enters a period of internal fragmentation. Conquered peoples start to rebel, and local aristocrats in the provinces grow increasingly defiant. Eventually, the supreme king, Mursili III, is overthrown and flees to Egypt. Leading the revolt is his uncle, Hattusili, who had commanded the Hittite forces at the Battle of Kadesh. After that, the Hittite Empire falls into endless civil conflict. Hittite culture and art begin to decline, and architecture becomes much simpler. Entire regions on the fringes of the empire break away from Hittite control. At the same time, a severe and prolonged drought hits Asia Minor, peaking around the late 13th and early 12th centuries BC. Famine spreads through Greece, the Hittite Empire, and its satellite states. Egypt and Mesopotamia are affected less, but even they struggle with food shortages. The Hittites beg the Egyptians for help, and the pharaoh sends ships with grain. However, Egypt is facing shortages of its own, so the aid barely makes a difference. A harsh famine strikes Crete, which had always relied on imported grain. With supplies running low everywhere, there's simply nowhere to buy what's needed. Arzawa, Kizzuwatna, Ugarit, Isua, and Troy all fall out of the Hittite sphere of influence. With the Hittites distracted by their internal problems, armed conflicts flare up between their satellite states. These conflicts were nothing new. The Luka people, in particular, had always been aggressive raiders and pirates. In the past, Hittite kings had mediated disputes and provided military support when needed. But now, without Hittite backing, Arzawa, Alasya, and Kizzuwatna face constant raids from the Achaeans and Luka. Things weren't going well in Assyria either. Around the same time as the Battle of Kadesh, Tukulti-Ninurta I came to power in Assyria. Seeing the Hittites' weakness, he launched aggressive campaigns to take control of vital trade routes. However, his biggest successes came in the south. In 1223 BC, he conquered Babylonia. In Assyria itself, Tukulti-Ninurta built a new city called Kar-Tukulti-Ninurta, meaning Tukulti-Ninurta's trade port. His plan was to move the capital there and shift the focus of religious worship to the god Ashur. This move upset both the aristocracy, who depended on trade passing through the old capital, and the priesthood. A revolt broke out, and Tukulti-Ninurta was assassinated. After his death, Assyria entered a period of decline and internal conflict. Power struggles between the aristocracy intensified, and the Babylonians, taking advantage of the turmoil, rose up and regained their independence. Egypt, too, faced its own challenges. While it managed to maintain internal stability and keep its central authority intact, it couldn't capitalize on the weakening of its rivals. Egypt was plagued by raids from the Libyans in the west and the Nubians in the south. The pharaoh's army struggled to keep up with these growing threats. On top of that, uprisings and revolts broke out in Canaan. Egypt had just enough strength to hold its ground, but barely. By around 1200 BC, Syria and northern Mesopotamia had become a war-torn wasteland. The key trade routes that once connected the great Bronze Age civilizations were now out of control. Assyria was in the midst of a civil war, Egypt was bogged down with uprisings and constant raids, the Hittites were grappling with internal turmoil, and Babylonia had been devastated by the Assyrian conquest and the relentless raids from the Elamites. These conditions made traveling through the region extremely dangerous. Trade, which had been a lifeline for centuries, came to a halt. On top of that, droughts and crop failures hit hard. When you can't even feed your own people, selling grain is impossible, and the scarcity of food spread far and wide. This led to the complete collapse of international trade and further plunged the Near Eastern states into decline. It was during this time of instability that migrations began. A large group of tribes, stretching from the Danube to the Balkans, moved south and east. The Dorians, ancestors of the future Spartans, invaded Greece, leading to a crisis and the eventual fall of the Mycenaean civilization. Within a short time, the Dorians conquered the entire Peloponnese. Joining forces with the Achaeans, they first raided Crete and the Aegean Islands, then launched raids into Asia Minor. One of the most famous episodes of these migrations was the Trojan War, as described by Homer, when the Dorians and Achaeans destroyed the city of Troy. At the same time, the Phrygians, distant relatives of the Dorians, moved south from the northern Balkans into Asia Minor. They were soon joined by the Kaska people from the southern Black Sea coast. Together, they swiftly took over the Hittite kingdom, eventually destroying its capital, Hattusa. A major factor in the success of the Dorian and Phrygian invasions was their widespread use of iron weapons. This wasn't because iron was superior to bronze. It wasn't. Bronze weapons were much better quality, but bronze was expensive and scarce, while iron was much more abundant. Iron occurs naturally 10 times more often than copper and 100 times more than tin, which are needed to make bronze. As a result, arming a large army with bronze became economically impractical, whereas iron offered a much more accessible alternative. Back in those days, only the aristocracy and small elite infantry units had bronze armor and weapons. Most of the foot soldiers were poorly equipped and badly trained. The main force of Bronze Age armies was the chariot, used as a mobile platform for archers. They would maneuver on the battlefield, shooting at each other from a distance. Whoever could build more chariots, arm them with more archers, and use them effectively would have the upper hand. Infantry was mostly made up of archers and slingers. The iron weapons used by the Dorians and Phrygians were of poor quality, but there were enough of them to arm large numbers of infantry. The main weapons shifted from bows and slings to swords and spears. This was a game changer on the battlefield. The small, elite armies of the Bronze Age states simply couldn't compete with the larger forces of infantry armed with iron swords. Now, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. The collapse of the Bronze Age is often linked to the invasion of the so-called Sea Peoples. Many people picture this as a single invasion where the Sea Peoples came and destroyed everything. Some of you might think, all right, the Sea Peoples are coming, and that's when the collapse happens. But in reality, the collapse was already well underway, and the Sea Peoples were just one part of the ongoing crisis, even though we haven't yet used their name. So who were the Sea Peoples, and what role did they play in the Bronze Age collapse? The term Sea Peoples is a modern one, coined by 19th-century French archaeologist Emmanuel de Rouget. He used it to describe the groups that attacked Egypt by sea in the 13th and 12th centuries BC. Egyptian sources provide a few names of these peoples: Karkassa, Lukka, Shurdan, Ekwesh, Shekelesh, Teresh, Denyen, Peliset, Cheker, Weshesh, and Meshwesh. Some of these groups are fairly well known. For instance, the Lukka have already been mentioned. The Peliset are the biblical Philistines, a Greek-speaking people, and the Ekvush and Denyen were probably the Achaeans and Danans. As for the rest, the connections are more speculative, with varying levels of certainty. The Shurdan and Shekelesh are often linked to the islands of Sardinia and Sicily, where the Sardinians and Sicans lived. Teresh is sometimes associated with the Trojans, the Etruscans, or the people of Tarsus. But these are all guesses based on the similarity of names. Some of these peoples are mentioned in sources well before the Bronze Age collapse. They were fierce, seafaring tribes engaged in maritime piracy. Some even served the major powers of the time. For example, during the Battle of Kadesh, a group of Shurdan fought on the Egyptian side, while the Lukka and Karkassa fought for the Hittites. As the crisis in these powerful empires deepened, the Sea Peoples started launching more frequent raids on cities and settlements along the Mediterranean coast. The first major attack on Egypt came around the time the Bronze Age collapse was in full swing, in 1207 BC, during the 5th year of Pharaoh Merneptah's reign. Joined by the Libyans, the Equish, Sheridan, Lucca, and others attacked Egypt from the west. But Merneptah's army mounted a strong defense, capturing many of the invaders. We also learn about these raids from letters exchanged between the king of Ugarit and the Hittite king, which mention the Sikula who live on ships, most likely referring to the Shekelesh. Another letter from the king of Alassia complains to Pharaoh Akhenaten about the constant raids by the Lucca. So, what's going on? The combination of large-scale warfare, drought, and famine in Asia Minor and Greece caused a massive wave of refugees and migrants looking for better lives. These included Trojans, Hittites, Mycenaeans, native people from the Aegean Islands, and others displaced by the Dorian and Phrygian invasions. They gathered in southern Anatolia, once part of the Hittite Empire, and then began migrating toward places they thought were safer: Syria, Canaan, and Egypt. Naturally, the local populations didn't welcome them, leading to bloody conflicts. This period was also marked by continuous raids from the Sea Peoples along the Mediterranean coast. Ramses III famously describes these events on the walls of his temple at Medinet Habu. The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands. All at once, the lands were removed and scattered in the fray. No land could stand before their arms, from Kata, Kode, Carchemish, Arzawa, and Alashia on, being cut off at one time. A camp was set up in one place in Amuru. They desolated its people, and its land was like that which has never come into being. They were coming forward toward Egypt, while the flame was prepared before them. Their confederation was the Peliset, Cheker, Shekelesh, Danuna, and Weshesh, lands united. They laid their hands upon the lands as far as the circuit of the earth, their hearts confident and trusting. In 1175 BC, Ugarit fell, one of the largest trade hubs of its time. We learn about the city's fate from a clay tablet, which contains a letter from the ruler of Ugarit to the king of Alassia. Here's what the letter says. My father, behold, the enemy's ships came. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. Does not my father know that all my troops and chariots are in the land of Hatti, and all my ships are in the land of Lucca? Thus, the country is abandoned to itself. May my father know it. The 7 ships of the enemy that came here inflicted much damage upon us. The clay tablet containing this letter was discovered in a firing kiln. It had been placed there, but was never retrieved before the city fell. The only force capable of halting the advance of the Sea Peoples and the migrating populations were the Egyptians. The decisive battles took place in 1175 BC. First, Ramses III's forces defeated the invaders on land, halting their progress. After that, he lured the Sea Peoples' fleet into the Nile Delta, where he set an ambush. Ramses's ships blocked their retreat route, while Egyptian infantry awaited them on the shore. However, even after this, the migrations did not end. The Peliset settled near the city of Gaza. They are known to us as the biblical Philistines, and it is from their name that the word Palestine is derived. The defeated Sheridan, Shekelesh, and possibly the Teresh migrated to the central Mediterranean, settling in Sardinia, Sicily, and northern Italy. The Israelites arrived in Canaan, not, most likely, from Egypt. The historicity of the Israelites' exodus from Egypt is considered highly questionable by most researchers. Many associate the origins of the Israelites with the Habiru people, who lived in the mountainous and semi-desert regions to the east of Canaan. The Aramean tribes migrated into the devastated Syria. Despite Egypt's successful defense, the loss of Canaan and Syria, along with the degradation of trade and economic networks, was a devastating blow from which it never truly recovered. Assyria and Babylon also fell into decline, though their lands were spared from the large-scale battles. Greece and Asia Minor entered into what could be considered a true Dark Age. So, what caused the collapse of the Great Bronze Age civilization? It was a combination of several factors, none of which, on their own, would have been enough to threaten such mighty civilizations. Drought, maritime piracy, warfare, internal conflicts, and the decline of international trade. This perfect storm combined to engulf the Bronze Age civilizations.